Listen up! You can get the new iPhone 16e with Apple Intelligence for just $49.99 when you switch to Boost Mobile. We pulled so many all-nighters to give you this deal, and hey, stop messing with the mic!
I'm just helping us catch people's attention. This is a great deal!
Exactly, so it doesn't need all that.
Fine.
Get the new iPhone 16e, available at Apple Store locations and the Apple Store online.
Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store for full offer details. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later. Restrictions apply.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Some interesting news. So it looks like, following on from my interview last week with Erica Verba, if you got to listen to it, or all about the Chilean musicologist and folk music archivist and musician, Violeta Parra. We talked about the terrible conditions that are being encountered by undocumented migrants and non-white people in Los Angeles at the moment, as a result of ICE and the general climate of fear in the amongst the students, and there will be a follow-up for this, I believe. So I'm going to be making some inquiries. I've had some possible interviewees, so we will be following this one. And when we do, I urge you, please share it far and wide. Let people know what's happening. Okay, this is our this is really important, and if any sort of kind of independent media like this can have any kind of importance at all, is about communicating realities, truths, facts, evidence, things that are happening. And it's all very well to talk about, the Battle of the Somme or Watergate or what have you. But if we don't try to do something with history and pretty dark history as it's unfolding in front of us, then it's a complete waste of time. So let's really do that, guys, if you can, and I will give you the heads up when that's coming out. So in other news, other kind of follow-up news, follow what is happening in Bogota today. The most important meeting that will happen in the world this year, this decade maybe, is happening in Bogota. Global South countries and a couple of global North countries too, Spain and Ireland, are meeting in defiance of US empire, in defiance of the kind of the deep arrangement between America, Great Britain, and Israel, to take concrete action against Israel, to force Israel to adhere to international law. And China is one of the attendees, so they have some muscle behind them. And this is when people talk about a multipolar world emerging, this is an example of it. This is an example of global South countries demanding legal, political, and diplomatic parity with everybody else. And in the most important of causes, the ending of genocide in Gaza. So I'll see if I can put some news links below, but this is a really one to follow, guys. Okay? And after these two really key global events, I'm going to turn to the parochial and cyclical and almost inevitable nature of life here in Great Britain. Okay, so sometimes the way in which your society can be best observed is through the lens of the outsider. And there was a fantastic article this week written by Yanis Varoufakis that explained really the Labour government in the UK, their economic kind of cul-de-sac that they're in. They are in the end game now, and they are about to lose it in spectacular fashion. But the implications for the rest of us are really, really not good. So basically, we are in a situation whereby the government has kind of dug its own economic grave and had done it on purpose before it even came into office. Okay. So, in order to kind of explain this, you need to rewind to the 2010s. When David Cameron, the Conservative Prime Minister, and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, came into office, they blamed the economic crisis, which was a world economic crisis, on profligate Labour spending. This always appeals very well to Conservative voters. They love to have somebody to blame, normally poor people who are in receipt of government welfare, or overpaid civil servants who Conservatives view as being kind of lazy pen pushers. And the kind of the conspiracy theory is that Labour governments, they sort of almost hire voters. They give away honest, hardworking taxpayers' monies to lazy people and the civil servants who will vote for them, and it's all a kind of a great scam. So, in order to kind of appeal to their voter base, the Conservatives created this institution called the Office for Budget Responsibility, which meant that perceived profligate spending could never happen again. It's something that markets like because the purchasers of British sovereign debt don't like the idea that excessive spending is happening. It tends to actually downgrade the value of the debt. So it was a device in order to lock in austerity permanently in Britain, in order to benefit an asset holding class. And the Labour Party, too craven to challenge it, and too kind of complicit following the removal of Jeremy Corbyn and his replacement with Keir Starmer, a very kind of right wing Labour figure, who has been kind of very much kind of courted and wooed by private equity money and city money. That the Labour Party is now kind of very much a captured political force. And it means that all of the things that Labour could have done in its first year in order to address the huge problems in Great Britain of gradual decline, of child poverty, of homelessness, of runaway utility bills, of crumbling infrastructure. Probably if you're in America, you recognise all of this very well. The Labour Party hasn't done and is kind of almost slightly jubilant that it's not going to do. Its political message, if I can understand it at all, is to appeal to a kind of a strata of lower middle class and working class voters who feel that their economic problems that we're all experiencing at the moment, high food prices, stagnant wages, are the problems of the kind of the usual suspects, refugees, migrants, and welfare claimants, and the undeserving sorts of people. Um, and the Labour Party, I think, seeks to build an electoral coalition out of this sort of angry Mittelstand in order to win subsequent elections. I doubt it will work. But anyway, I'm going on and I'm going to read what Yanis Varoufakis has to say, because the last kind of hand of economic cards has just been played by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and it's really a very poor one, and it's going to have serious consequences, as it really is about fueling asset prices and creating an artificial housing boom. Britain has almost lost the means to generate wealth in any other way. Okay, Yanis Varoufakis writes, Britain is a wealthy country, yet its people feel poor, and its governing politicians stagger between fiscal ruin and ruinous unpopularity. It took a radical political turn half a century ago for the UK to reach this dire predicament, and nothing short of another radical political turn can extricate the country from it. A year after its landslide election victory, Keir Starmer's government looks just as mired as Rishi Sunak's was in an austerity trap that, like any self-respecting zombie, refuses to die. Rachel Reeves, the besieged Chancellor, deserves to be lambasted for a litany of unforced errors. She tolerates the avoidable hemorrhaging of the public purse by £9.3 billion annually, a loss that results from the poor management of Britain's debt, while fighting with backbenchers over the £6.25 billion that she wanted to take away from people genuinely in need. However, Britain's inability to escape its zombie austerity trap is structural. Government supporters go to great lengths to reject all talk of austerity. They point to the steady rise in public spending, in particular the extra £113 billion in capital investment, around 1% of GDP annually until 2029, unveiled in Reeves' recent spending review, which even prompted the Tories to accuse her of fiscal largesse. Be that as it may, a careful look at the numbers confirms that Britain remains in zombie austerity's trap. By 2029, spending will be down on everything except health and defence. Compared to 2010, education will receive 5% less, criminal justice and the prison service 15% less, welfare and pensions 30% less, and calamitously, local government 50% less. Local government across the UK is facing bankruptcy in large parts of the country, which is an extraordinary statement to have to make, given Britain's protestations that it is the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world. Well, it might be, but often that can equate to a poor country with rich people in it. As for new capital expenditure, to gauge its impact, it must be measured against the UK's capital shortfall. After decades of underinvestment, the UK's stock of capital is 1/3 smaller than those of comparable advanced economies, a shortfall of around £2 trillion, or 2/3 of GDP. Thus, Labour's new capital expenditure amounts to no more than 5% of what would be necessary for Britain's productivity to catch up with comparable countries. Is it any wonder that the usually over-optimistic Office of Budget Responsibility expects a second lost decade or for half of the British people? Democracies find it very difficult to withstand these kinds of conditions. And Great Britain is becoming, I would say, in all measures, a gradually less democratic state. And has a significant demographic who is now considering whether voting for a right-wing authoritarian party in the guise of the Reform Party of Nigel Farage is a meaningful alternative. This is the language of desperation for many people. Having long ago discovered her inner George Osborne, Chancellor Reeves is about to unveil also her latent Margaret Thatcher in a Mansion House speech foreshadowing a new Big Bang for the City of London. Like a copycat felon, she has chosen her crime scene meticulously, for it was there in the city that today's problems took root when Thatcher stumbled on financialisation as the main driver of her economic and cultural revolution. With the rare exception of Norway, whose oil and gas revenues were ploughed sensibly into public education, health and future pensions, sudden windfalls prove a curse when societies fail to invest them productively. The Dutch disease, for example, hollowed out the Netherlands' industrial base with a flood of natural gas revenues that pushed asset prices through the roof and increased society's reliance on state benefits. A couple of years later, Thatcher spearheaded a British version of the Dutch disease on the back of financialisation. Financialisation, I suppose, can best be described as the liberalisation of finance, the ability of finance to have more leeway, to be able to lend in ways that it previously hadn't done, to inject debt into parts of the economy that previously hadn't existed, and to become a more powerful organ of the British economy, and a more powerful organ, indeed, of the British state. The Iron Lady came to power determined to treat a stagnating Britain to shock therapy. Her instruments of choice were austerity, mainly massive cuts in public spending, calculated destruction of uncompetitive but productive industries, and privatisation. While Thatcher waited in vain for privateers to invest in productive capital, she had to find a source of growth to offset the ill effects of her shocks. The City of London was that source. To get the city to deliver, her government did two things. They freed the bankers from the regulatory shackles with a big bang, and they threw tremendous, which is a deregulatory moment, they threw tremendous quantities of pre-existing public wealth into the city's financial circuitry, council houses, public utilities in particular. So a mid-80s city boom was born of privatisation and the kind of mergers and acquisitions that came following that, and also enormous amounts of wealth that poured in from council house sales. And this was how you turn a manufacturing economy into a rentier economy. The Thatcher government sold the family silver, including North Sea oil, to spend the proceeds on generating debt-driven asset price inflation that hit the gigantic fiscal and productivity costs of sweeping cuts, which shrank aggregate demand and therefore undermined investment in productive capital. What do you call such conduct? I call it, Yanis Varoufakis says, profligate austerity. Growth did return, but it did so despite Thatcher's profligate austerity, and only because swathes of society's commonwealth were being liquidated at cut-down prices. So if you sell all your country's assets at a bargain, you can generate growth temporarily, but at the end of it, everybody, or the vast majority of people, are poorer. The society itself is poorer.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.
Thatcher's business model remained intact under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. If anything, New Labour boosted it handsomely by removing many of the few remaining regulatory constraints on the city, and by throwing into its financial plumbing the proceeds from deregulated public services, mainly the NHS, while their governments did use taxes on city revenues to fund the NHS and social services in a way that the Tories had not, industry continued to wither in the arid shadow of a city of London that shunned industrial capital and whose recklessness brewed the mother of all financial disasters in 2008. Politically and culturally, Thatcher's profligate austerity was a triumph. Workers whose jobs were not culled went into debt to buy British Gas shares and their own council houses. They made a mint, jumping onto the frenzied property market escalator that transformed Britain into a financialised assetocracy, in which the fabled Sierra man felt invested. But the bill arrived soon after. Before long, they and their children were paying through their nose for lower quality services, railways, energy, sewage, social care, etc. Today, their grandchildren have no access to decent housing, to free education, to a functioning NHS, to good quality jobs. As for their governments, Tory or Labour, they are no longer able to support the struggling majority without blowing up the public finances. This is now the cage that Labour finds itself in. It can't, by sticking to the rules created by the Tories, it can't undo the Tories' damage and the damage that austerity has done. All they can do is keep reflating housing and financial bubbles, suppressing wages, and delivering speeches in the city, hoping to placate the market's confidence fairy. Following financialisation's Waterloo in 2008 and its new Labour bailout at the expense of the rest of society, profligate austerity gave its place to George Osborne's passive-aggressive austerity, or as he called it, the policy of expansionary contraction. Avoiding deep Thatcherite cuts, Osborne engineered the slow-motion starvation of public services, devolved blaming, e.g. councils choosing to close daycare facilities due to Whitehall funding cuts, and off-balance sheet trickery, private finance initiatives, which were ruinous for the public purse. Meanwhile, the Bank of England minted almost $895 billion to keep the original Thatcher-Blair asset bubbles inflated. Imagine how different things would have been now if, instead, Britain's central bank had used this money to support the bonds of a new public investment bank that ploughed more than $1 trillion into green technologies. Austerity, in that sense, austerity was then and always has been a political choice, and bailouts were always a political choice. It would have been, in the eyes of many economists, just as sensible to put the bailout money directly into people's bank accounts, or directly into small businesses to prop them up, or to pump it directly into the economy, not to create asset price booms, asset price inflation through quantitative easing going straight to the banks. Osborne's passive-aggressive austerity came to an end when the discontent it had caused played a key role in tilting the Brexit referendum in favour of leave. It had to go. I doubt it's actually really ever gone. I mean, austerity still is the defining feature of most people's lives in Great Britain. After a period of stasis under Theresa May, Boris Johnson was inspired by US Republican presidents. Win a mandate on austerity and promises to starve the beast, the voracious welfare state, but immediately after spend liberally on your pet projects while granting lucrative contracts and tax cuts to your rich mates. Alas, as Liz Truss was to discover painfully, this sham austerity requires a state that issues the world currency, not the pound. And this was said to Truss at the time. I think it was the historian Rick Perlstein who Truss cited his books, which are all universally criticisms of the Republican movement and the Republican Party. So you obviously haven't read them properly. And he said at the time, Truss's policies are kind of completely insane, unless, of course, you're the president of the USA and you can decide on how many dollars are printed into circulation. Perhaps on some level, that's who she actually thinks she is. Who knows? And that's how we get to Rachel Reeves' touchingly delusional social democratic austerity. In fact, its originator was Piers Steinbrück, a social democrat German finance minister who, in a parliamentary speech delivered in 2008, argued, as Reeves does now, that cutting expenditure to create fiscal space is essential for democracy in order to preserve space for democratic choices. There is this kind of, again, this right-wing idea that government welfare crowds out the private sector. If government can provide education and hospitals, then what is it? Where is the space for entrepreneurialism? And the answer is, well, there isn't any. I mean, or there is for people that want to pay for that sort of thing. But the vast majority of people, socially provided goods, education, healthcare, housing, is an entirely reasonable proposition. Why do I call this delusional, says Yanis Varoufakis? Because, as Osborne and Steinbrück found out, Reeves is now discovering, in societies with inflated asset prices and low productive investment, where massive money printing for the few has, for so long, walked side by side with austerity for the many, slashing social expenditure gives the Chancellor no new fiscal space at all. All that happens is, like a deranged cat, the Chancellor ends up chasing her own tail. Make no mistake, as Rachel Reeves is delivering her Mansion House address to the fine people in the City of London, her audience knows all this. They know that Miss Reeves, just like her predecessors, cannot balance the books. They know that the point of fiscal policy is to keep the underfunding of government expenditure at a level consistent with long-term debt sustainability, while Britain's productive capacities continue to wither. And they do not care. The only thing they care about is to keep alive the corporate financial zombies created and sustained by state intervention. And for this, they need austerity to shift as much of the economic pain as possible from asset owners to non-owners in the labour market, in housing, in utilities, etc. Does this mean there's no alternative? Hell no. Britain is a rich country. Its welfare state's bankruptcy is a political choice, albeit a deeply undemocratic one.
In 1920, a broke immigrant in Boston became one of America's richest, most infamous men, practically overnight. He swindled the modern equivalent of $250 million and etched his name into history as the mastermind behind one of the most notorious scams ever, the Ponzi scheme. Hosted by Maya Lau and featuring award-winning comedian and actor Sebastian Maniscalco, this is Easy Money, The Charles Ponzi Story, an Apple original podcast produced by At Will Media. Follow and listen on Apple Podcasts.
One option is to continue using the state's powers to inflate unsustainable asset prices at the expense of the majority who do not own them and who are, in the name of a fictional shareholders' democracy, condemned to zombie austerity. Another option is to remove the supply of goods essential to a civilized society, basic housing, education, healthcare, from markets that can never supply them efficiently, let alone equitably. Naturally, this will mean that asset prices will fall to much lower, albeit sustainable levels. But that's the price of liberating half of the population from savage private housing markets, i.e. reversing Thatcher's vandalism of council housing, ending the pretense that there can ever be well-functioning electricity markets, founding a proper public investment bank, creating a decent fiscal space, and last but not least, reining in a Bank of England whose quantitative easing and then tightening policies have done so much harm. What a splendid day for democracy it would be if the British voters were given this choice at the ballot box. But can you imagine any political party proposing the second option being given the opportunity to present its agenda, given the demonising that the parasitic assetocracy would undoubtedly unleash against it? I can't. This being 10 years since my experiences as a finance minister elected to end austerity, Yanis Varoufakis was the finance minister in Greece, I take the liberty of drawing a comparison. It is a difficult comparison because Greece and the UK are obviously ever so different. Unlike in Britain, where austerity was homegrown and chosen at the ballot box, it was imposed on the Greeks by external forces who presented it as an invading army would present terms of surrender to a country defeated in war. Yet a chief similarity is quite revealing. Two left-of-centre prime ministers elected to end austerity. I don't classify Keir Starmer as that at all, by the way. But anyway. Elected to end austerity, who ended up making austerity permanent because of an inexorable desire to be liked by those who never did and never will vote for them. The key to escaping this fate seems to me a certain regard for what the types Rachel Reeves is about to address in the City of London think covet. There you have it. And if you listen to the interview I did with Rachel Morris the other week on the nature of ongoing British austerity, that is the kind of the long story. Here we are in the kind of the post-Thatcherite era, where the basic premises of Thatcherism no longer exist and no longer function. And the wealth that Thatcher squandered in a generation is not necessarily gone, but it's certainly hiding. And a robust and renewed democracy will hopefully at some point be able to locate it. Thanks very much, everybody. All the very best. Catch you on the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Grab a cold drink at a hot price, like a refreshing Coke Zero or sweet tea in any size for only $1.49. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.